In the frozen silence of Spokane, a police officer's world collapses overnight. Daniel Holt, once a decorated cop, wakes to find himself accused of a crime he didn't commit. His body cam footage altered his badge stripped, and his daughter Lily, now the only light he has left. When whispers outside his window reveal a plan to take her for her safety, Daniel does what every father would. He runs. With his loyal German shepherd Max limping by his side through the snow, Daniel begins a midnight escape that uncovers betrayal, hidden contracts, and a truth powerful enough to destroy the people who framed him. What they didn't expect was the courage of a 10-year-old girl who would turn the tide. Watch till the end. You won't forget this story of loyalty, love, and redemption. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe truth still finds its way home. The cold over Spokane settled like a gray film that morning, heavy enough to turn every sound brittle. Officer Daniel Holt crossed the precinct parking lot with his collar-up boots crunching against frost breath hanging in the air. Inside the station, the old heater rattled and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with damp uniforms. He moved quietly down the corridor toward his locker second from the end, marked with a fading label, Holt D. When he swung it open, a plain white envelope slipped from between his gloves and landed at his feet. No return address, no signature, just his name printed in neat black ink. He frowned, tore it open, and read, Internal Affairs Review Complaint of Excessive Force during the Tate Avenue Incident. He read it twice, then again slower. There was no incident on Tate Avenue. On that date, he'd been directing traffic by the riverfront a full mile away. He stood there, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. After 20 years of clean service, someone was fabricating ghosts. 15 minutes later, he was in Captain Reeves's office. The blinds were half drawn, the room gray with early light. Reeves didn't look surprised. "You've seen it," he said flatly. Daniel set the envelope on his desk. "It's false. You know it's false." Reeves rubbed a hand over his jaw, avoiding eye contact. "Maybe so, but an anonymous complaint triggers review. Protocol." Daniel heard the unspoken warning beneath it. "You know who's behind this." Reeves only said, "Keep your head down. Cooperate. Don't make it worse." Daniel left without a word. The hallway smelled of wax and old paperwork. On the wall, the photographs of fallen officers stared back at him, rows of solemn faces framed by brass plaques. Their silence felt like a verdict. Outside, dawn stretched weakly over Spokane. He drove home through thin fog, his windshield wipers squeaking over frost. The radio mumbled about another cold front. He barely heard it. The letter lay on the seat beside him, its white edge catching the light every time he passed under a street lamp. Whoever sent it knew what they were doing. They wanted his name tainted, his footing gone. The house on Oak Ridge Drive came into view, porch light still burning. Inside, through the kitchen window, he saw his wife Karen moving between counters. She used to teach literature at the local school, her hands always smelling faintly of chalk. Now they were pale, restless, always organizing something that didn't need organizing. When he opened the door, the smell of cinnamon and coffee greeted him. "You're home early," she said without turning. "Paperwork," he answered, setting his cap down. "Internal affairs nonsense. Some false complaint." She froze for a fraction of a second before resuming. "Internal affairs." He forced a shrug. "Routine check." She poured 2 cups of coffee but only filled one. "These things have a way of growing," she murmured. He tried to smile. "I'll handle it." She nodded, though her shoulders stayed tense. On the desk near the hallway sat a folder he hadn't seen before, blue header state emblem. Family, Court of Washington. He stared. "What's that?" She looked over her shoulder. "Just preparation." "For what?" "For if things go wrong," she said, voice careful. "If you're suspended." "You think I'll be suspended?" "I think the world isn't fair, Daniel, and I have to think of Lily." Her calm hurt worse than anger. He wanted to argue, but small footsteps interrupted them. 10-year-old Lily stood in the doorway, hair tangled from sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Daddy Max keeps whining," she said. "Can I let him out?" Daniel softened instantly. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's both go." They stepped onto the porch where the air was sharper, cleaner. Their German shepherd Max stood waiting, tail wagging, eyes bright. Daniel unclipped the leash. Max bounded into the yard, snow scattering under his paws. Lily's laughter rang out bright against the morning stillness. For a heartbeat, everything felt normal, home, warmth, safety. But even that sound carried an edge of fragility, like glass under strain. Daniel watched them, his breath forming small clouds. The world looked calm, but he could feel the storm building. Through the kitchen window, Karen was gathering the papers on the desk, sliding them neatly into a drawer. She hesitated, then locked it. He looked away, jaw tightening. Max returned to his side, pressing his muzzle against Daniel's hand. "What do you think, boy?" he whispered. The dog's amber eyes reflected the pale sky, steady and loyal. Daniel stroked the fur behind his ear, feeling the cold sink through his gloves. Somewhere a crow cried. He looked back at the house, its familiar lines, the warmth glowing through the window, and wondered how long before it stopped being home. Inside, the clock ticked steady as a heartbeat. Karen called softly that breakfast was ready. Daniel followed Lily and Max padding behind. The air inside felt too warm, too still. He hung his coat, sat at the table, and tasted the bitterness of the coffee she'd poured for him. Karen moved silently, the click of her wedding ring against the cup sounding louder than it should. Lily chatted about school, about a snow project due next week. Daniel listened, nodding, though his mind was far away in that locker room, that envelope, those typed words that could erase 2 decades in a blink. He looked at his wife and saw distance, looked at his daughter and saw what he stood to lose. Max lay by the door, ears pricked, gaze following every movement as if guarding them from something unseen. Daniel reached down, brushing his fingers over the dog's fur. "We'll be all right," he whispered, though he wasn't sure he believed it. The furnace kicked on its low hum, filling the silence. Outside, the wind shifted, brushing snow from the trees. Inside, the stillness deepened, the kind that precedes breaking glass. The sky over Spokane was the color of tarnished steel when Daniel parked in front of the precinct, his breath fogging the windshield. He sat there a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, the letter from Internal Affairs folded neatly in his jacket pocket. A week had passed since the first notice arrived, and every hour since then had felt like walking through invisible crosshairs. Inside, the corridors hummed with tension. He could feel the way conversations hushed when he entered, the way glances shifted just past him. At 8 huzzahs sharp, he was summoned to the conference room. The walls were bare except for a single clock ticking too loudly. Captain Reeves stood near the window, shoulders squared but eyes shadowed. 2 Internal Affairs officers sat at the table, a man with a narrow face and a woman whose voice carried the calm cruelty of bureaucracy. And beside them, to Daniel's surprise, was Sergeant Tom Avery. 15 years they had worked side by side. Midnight patrols, crash scenes, the endless grind of night shifts that bonded men stronger than family. Tom avoided his eyes. The woman began. "Sergeant Avery, you were Officer Holt's partner on November 10th. Can you describe what occurred on Tate Avenue?" Daniel's chest tightened. "There was no Tate Avenue incident," he said, his voice steady. But Tom spoke at the same time. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "We responded to a disturbance." The words dropped like stones. Daniel turned toward him. "Tom, what are you doing?" The woman continued, unbothered. "Did Officer Holt use excessive force?" Tom's fingers twisted together. He lost control for a second. He was under stress. The room went still. Daniel could hear his pulse in his ears. "You know that's not true," he said softly. Tom looked at the table. "I'm sorry, Dan." The rest of the questioning blurred into noise. The scribble of pens, the click of the clock, the sterile phrases of procedure. When it ended, Daniel stood feeling older than his years. "Who got to you?" he asked. Tom didn't answer. Only when the others left did he finally whisper, "I owed money. They said they'd clear it if I confirmed the report. I didn't think it would go this far." Daniel stared at him, disbelief hardening into quiet fury. "You always had a choice," he said, and walked out. The precinct corridor stretched long and cold. Reeves's voice called from behind, summoning him back. In the office, the blinds were half drawn. A badge and a service pistol lay on the desk. Daniel Reeves began his tone heavy. "The board recommends temporary suspension pending review." Daniel didn't sit. "You mean they want me gone?" Reeves sighed. "It's out of my hands. There's pressure from downtown. Someone wants this buried." "Who?" Daniel asked. Reeves's gaze shifted to the window. "You don't want to know." Daniel unpinned his badge slowly, feeling its weight in his hand. He placed it on the desk beside the gun. 20 years, he said quietly. "You think a lie erases that?" Reeves looked at him then, guilt flickering in his eyes before retreating. "I'm sorry," he murmured. Daniel nodded once. "So am I." He left the office, passing rows of desks and familiar faces now turned uncertain. No one spoke. The only sound was the echo of his boots against the tile. In the locker room, he opened his locker for the last time. Inside hung his spare uniform, and Max's old K9 leash frayed at the edges. He took it down, coiling it carefully. The smell of detergent and metal filled his lungs. When he stepped outside, snow was falling, thick, soft flakes that muted the world. He drove aimlessly for a while, streets blurring into white and gray. His thoughts circled back to Tom's voice, the tremor in it, the cowardice. But beneath the anger was something colder understanding. People broke when pushed hard enough. He'd seen it on the streets and now in his own ranks. Back home, the house glowed faintly against the darkening sky. Karen stood in the doorway when he entered. She saw the absence of the badge before he spoke. "They suspended you," she said, not as a question. He nodded. "Temporary." She folded her arms. "Temporary has a way of becoming permanent." He didn't answer. Lily's laughter drifted from the living room, soft and unaware. He turned toward it, instinctively needing the sound. Karen watched him, her eyes full of something he couldn't read. Fear, maybe pity. He walked past her, knelt beside Max, who rose from the rug, tail wagging faintly. The dog's amber eyes met his, steady as ever. Daniel scratched behind his ears. "It's you and me, partner," he whispered. Max leaned into his hand. For the first time that day, the tightness in Daniel's chest eased just slightly. That night, sleep refused to come. He sat by the window, snow drifting under the streetlight, thinking of all the years he'd worn that badge, the weight of it, the pride. He remembered the first day of training, the oath, the sense of purpose that had once been unshakable. Now he felt hollowed out, as if someone had taken that purpose and left only the uniform behind. Near dawn, he drove to the river. The water moved slow under the ice. Max trotted beside him, nose to the wind. Daniel threw a stick. Max fetched it, limping slightly on the return, the cold biting into his joints. "Still faster than me," Daniel said quietly. He crouched, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "We'll find out who did this." Back in town, the streets were empty, snow unbroken. When he pulled into the driveway, he saw Karen through the window, speaking on the phone, her back turned. The family court folder lay open on the table again. He didn't go inside right away. Instead, he sat in the car engine, idling eyes on the faint reflection of himself in the glass. No badge, no uniform, just a man with nothing left to lose but his child. As the first light of morning broke, Daniel knew one thing for certain: the truth had enemies, and they were closer than he'd thought. The days after Daniel's suspension settled into a dull gray rhythm where the world outside seemed to hold its breath. Snow kept falling over Spokane, blanketing the streets in silence. Inside the Holt house, that same silence had a different weight, thicker and harder to bear. Daniel tried to fill it with routine, making coffee, fixing the creak in the stair railing, shoveling the walkway, but nothing could drown the thought that someone was watching his life crumble. Karen spoke less with every passing day. She worked from her laptop, murmuring into the phone at odd hours, her voice low-controlled. She no longer asked about his day or offered the polite reassurances she once did. It was as if she had already started living in a different version of the house, one where Daniel didn't belong. Lily, 10 years old and too perceptive for her own good, noticed it all. One late afternoon, while Karen sat at the kitchen table, Lily lingered at the stairs with her sketchbook. The light was dim, the air heavy with the scent of coffee. Her mother's voice broke the quiet. "Yes, Richard. Before the hearing," she said softly into the phone. Lily frowned her crayon, pausing mid-color. "I want to ensure full custody," Karen continued. "He's not stable right now, not after what happened at the department. The court will see that." Lily's chest tightened. She knew what custody meant. She'd heard it whispered once when a classmate's parents divorced. Her mother's tone softened the way it always did when she spoke to adults outside the house. "I'll deliver the documents tomorrow." "No, he won't fight. He's exhausted." Lily sat frozen, small fingers gripping her pencil until it broke. Karen ended the call and sighed, rubbing her temple. Lily slipped silently upstairs before being noticed, heart pounding. In her room, she sat beside Max, who lifted his head and watched her. She whispered, "Mom wants to take me away from Daddy." The dog tilted his head, amber eyes filled with quiet concern, then placed his paw gently on her knee. It was the only comfort she could trust. That night, Daniel returned, later than usual, snow dusting his shoulders. He had spent hours at the library combing through old department records, searching for any trace of the case that had cost him his badge. There was nothing, just sealed files and bureaucratic walls. When he walked in, Max was pacing by the back door, nails scratching against the wood. "What's up, partner?" Daniel asked, setting his jacket aside. Max barked once, then scratched harder, focused on the same spot beneath the porch light. Daniel frowned, opened the door, and stepped into the cold. The yard was empty, only the hiss of wind and falling snow. "Nobody there," he murmured, rubbing the dog's head. But Max didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the far corner of the porch. Daniel crouched, running his hand along the railing, and felt something foreign under the wood-smooth, cold metal taped beneath. He pulled it free carefully. A tiny device blinked once under the porch light before going dark. It was a listening device. Daniel's breath came out in a cloud. He turned it over in his gloved hand, realization tightening in his chest. Someone was listening, not just at the station, but here inside his home. He slipped the bug into his pocket and stepped back inside. Karen looked up from her laptop. "What were you doing out there?" she asked casually. Max thought he heard something he said. She nodded, her attention already returning to the screen. Daniel's heart thudded as he sat down, the device burning cold in his pocket. He didn't tell her. Not yet. The next morning, he drove across town to meet Lieutenant Howard Dean, an old friend from his early years on the force. They stood by Dean's truck in a parking lot slick with ice. Daniel handed him the device. Dean examined it, brows knitting. "Department issue," he said. "Used for undercover ops surveillance grade. You're not supposed to find one of these unless someone's monitoring you." Daniel's stomach sank. "Who authorized it?" Dean hesitated. "Internal Affairs, maybe, but they've been using private contractors lately. A firm called SafeTrack Security. They handle special cases." "You ticked the wrong box, Dan." Daniel pocketed the device. "So they're spying on me in my own home." Dean didn't answer, but his silence said enough. On the drive back, Daniel's mind raced. Whoever planted the device wasn't just investigating. They were framing him, controlling the narrative before he could fight back. At home, the house looked peaceful, deceptively so. Karen was baking her expression calm, her sleeves rolled neatly. Lily sat at the table, drawing with concentration. When Daniel bent down to look, she showed him the paper, a drawing of 3 figures walking through snow. A man, a girl, and a dog. "That's us," she said proudly. "We're going somewhere warm." Daniel smiled faintly. "Sounds like a good plan." She hesitated, eyes downcast. "Mom said we might move, but she said you can't come." The words cut deeper than anything internal affairs had thrown at him. He brushed a hand over her hair. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Wherever you go, I'll find you." She nodded, not quite reassured. Max sat at her feet, ears pricked, watching Daniel closely. That night, after the house had gone quiet, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with the listening device in front of him. The small black square reflected the yellow light above, harmless in appearance, but poisoned in purpose. He thought about Karen's call, Lily's fear the way Max had sensed it before anyone else. He thought about how betrayal had found its way into every corner of his life. Outside, the snow thickened, pressing against the windows like a whisper. Max padded into the room, tail low, eyes steady. Daniel reached down, resting a hand on his head. "You were right again, partner," he murmured. "Someone's been here." The dog gave a soft chuff, as if confirming what Daniel already knew, that danger had crossed their threshold long before tonight. Upstairs, Lily turned in her sleep, unaware of how much her world was already shifting. Downstairs, Daniel stared at the listening device, realizing that silence itself had become his enemy. The wind carried a restless whisper through the Spokane night as Daniel sat alone in the living room, the clock ticking past midnight. The glow from his laptop painted his face in cold light, while Max lay beside the couch, ears twitching at every creak in the walls. The discovery of the listening device had shifted something inside Daniel. The quiet no longer felt like peace, but surveillance, and the house that once sheltered him now seemed to listen back. Karen and Lily were asleep upstairs, their breathing faint above the steady hum of the heater. He waited until the house was fully still before opening his laptop and connecting to the police network, using an old administrative access code he had memorized years ago. The system protested at first warning of restricted access, but Daniel knew its rhythms like a language. He bypassed the barriers and scrolled through archived case files, his cursor hovering over the folder labeled Tate Avenue Incident. For a moment he hesitated. His name glared from the screen as if waiting for confession. When he clicked, a single video file appeared, time-stamped the same night as the alleged assault. He opened it, and the footage began to play. Body cam perspective, blurry lights, street noise. Then him, his own face caught in the reflection of a squad car window, grabbing a suspect by the collar, shouting something indistinct. The suspect stumbled, then fell hard to the ground. Daniel froze. The footage showed him striking again, rough and unrelenting. It was brutal damning, but he knew it was false. He remembered that night perfectly. He'd been rerouted for traffic control near the river. The details, the uniform, the voice, the gestures looked real because they had used real footage. Edited, rearranged, weaponized. His pulse quickened. Someone had taken hours of ordinary body cam footage and turned it into a crime. Max stirred beside him, lifting his head, sensing his agitation. "You were right again, boy," Daniel whispered. "They built this." He minimized the window and opened the metadata. Years of police work had taught him where to look the fingerprints hidden in digital code. The first entries matched the official storage servers, but further down he found something strange, a secondary user path encrypted but not fully hidden, labeled Local Access. Modified copy. The timestamp aligned with the day after his suspension, the day he had come home to find Karen on the phone. He dug deeper, tracing the IP address. His heart began to pound louder than the clicking keys. The terminal source was registered to a home router. His home. He leaned back, staring at the glowing screen. "That's impossible," he muttered, but Max's low growl cut through the thought. The dog's eyes fixed toward the staircase as if hearing something beyond human range. Daniel muted the laptop, listening. Only silence. Then a faint creak the floorboard outside the study. He turned off the screen and waited. The steps faded. Whoever it was had gone back to bed unaware he had noticed. When he reopened the laptop, he ran a deeper trace. The modification logs showed the user profile a name he knew too well. Karen Holt. For a long time, he didn't move. His mind fought the conclusion-building and collapsing reasons in the same breath. Maybe she hadn't known what she was accessing. Maybe someone used her device remotely. But deep down, he knew better. The file wasn't just viewed, it had been edited, exported, and transferred through her account. She hadn't merely seen it, she had sent it. He minimized the data and leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the dark window. Outside, snow flurried past the porch light. Max pressed against his leg, quiet but watchful. "How long have they had her, huh?" Daniel murmured. He thought of the private firm Dean had mentioned, SafeTrack Security, a private company with both department clearance and invisible authority. If they needed leverage, they'd find it in a frightened spouse, someone who thought she was protecting her child. He remembered Karen's late-night calls, her sudden calm about the custody papers, and the way she had stopped asking questions about the investigation. It all aligned too perfectly. His hands trembled slightly as he opened a new folder and copied the incriminating metadata to a flash drive. He labeled it Truth. The word looked too small for what it carried. Max whined softly, his ears pricking toward the stairs again. Daniel shut the laptop, pocketed the drive, and rose slowly. Upstairs, a faint light glowed under the bedroom door. Karen was still awake. He could hear the muffled tone of her voice on the phone, gentle measured. He moved closer, careful not to let the floor creak. "Yes, I sent the file," she whispered. "He doesn't know. They said it was the only way to guarantee custody." There was a pause. "No, he won't check. He trusts me." The words sliced through him cleanly. No anger, just clarity. The betrayal wasn't born of malice but fear, a fear she'd allowed others to weaponize. He stepped back, quietly retreating to the hallway before she noticed. Downstairs again, he sat at the kitchen table until dawn began to stain the snow outside with pale light. He understood now why they'd targeted him. His career had made him dangerous to those who profited from corruption. They couldn't destroy him outright, so they destroyed his credibility and used his family to finish the job. When Karen came down in the morning, she looked tired, her eyes red, but her tone composed. "You were up all night," she said, glancing at the cold coffee cup beside him. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. "You—" She hesitated. "I was thinking. About the hearing. About everything." He nodded. "Good. Maybe it's time we talk." Her eyes flickered uncertain, but before she could answer, Max barked suddenly, sharp and alert, staring toward the back door again. The same spot. The same signal. Daniel rose and looked outside, seeing fresh footprints in the snow leading away from the porch toward the street, too recent to be from last night. Someone had been there again. Watching. He turned back to Karen, his voice calm but cold. "Lock the doors. Don't answer calls you don't know. We're not safe." She blinked, confused. "Daniel, what are you talking about?" He didn't answer. Instead, he went to his coat, slipped the flash drive into an inner pocket, and whistled for Max. The dog trotted to his side, ready. Daniel opened the door slightly enough for the winter air to bite his face. "If they want a fight," he murmured more to himself than to her, "they'll have one." The morning after the footprints vanished beneath the new snow, Daniel stood by the frosted window. Coffee untouched the street outside, motionless under a sky the color of tarnished steel. The silence of the neighborhood had become unnatural, like the hush before a siren. Max lay near the door, head resting on his paws, eyes fixed toward the yard, as though guarding something only he could sense. Karen was upstairs, her voice faint through the walls, probably another call she didn't want overheard. Daniel didn't bother asking anymore. His trust had worn as thin as the coffee ring circling the table. He stepped outside into the brittle air, the kind that bit through skin and filled lungs with the taste of cold iron. The snow crunched under his boots as he shoveled the front walk, the rhythm steadying his mind. From across the street came a shout. "Hey, Mr. Holt!" He turned to see Evan, the teenage boy who lived 2 houses down, jogging toward him, his breath puffing white in the air. "Morning, Evan." Daniel greeted, lowering the shovel. "You skipping school?" The boy shook his head. "Nah, bus is late. I just wanted to ask, are you okay?" Daniel frowned slightly. "I've been better." "Why?" Evan glanced around before lowering his voice. "There's this car that parks across from your house every night. Looks like a police car, but no plates. My dad works nights, and he said it's always there when he leaves same spot engine running. He said it's been going on all week." Daniel felt the chill deepen this time from inside. "You're sure it's a cruiser?" Evan nodded quickly. "Yeah, one of those black ones. Lights off, windows tinted. My dad said someone's inside. He thought it was weird. Just figured you should know." Daniel forced a calm smile. "Thanks for telling me, Evan. That means a lot." The boy shrugged awkwardly. "Be careful, Mr. Holt. My dad says sometimes people watch others for reasons that ain't good." He waved and hurried off toward the bus stop, his voice fading into the winter quiet. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, staring at the street that suddenly seemed more alive than before. Every parked car now suspicious, every quiet window a possible eye. He turned toward the house. Through the curtain, Karen's silhouette moved past the window. She paused for a second, as if sensing him watching, then disappeared into the kitchen. Later that evening, Daniel parked his old sedan farther down the block and waited. Max sat beside him, alert ears pricked. Around 10 headlights turned the corner, black sedan, no plates. It rolled to a stop exactly where Evan had said, the engine humming low. A faint orange glow lit the windshield as if someone inside was smoking. Daniel's pulse quickened. He waited, watching. The figure never left the car. After 2 hours, the vehicle pulled away, its taillights vanishing into the fog. He let out a slow breath. They wanted him to see it, to know they were there. The next afternoon, Lily came home from school quieter than usual, clutching her backpack to her chest. Daniel was fixing the leg of a dining chair, tools scattered across the floor. "Hey, kiddo," he said, smiling softly. "You look like someone took the sunshine out of your pocket." She didn't smile back. "Daddy," she whispered, glancing toward the kitchen. "Can we talk where Mom can't hear?" His expression shifted. "Sure. Let's go to the porch." Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the air still and clear. Max followed, sitting between them like a sentry. Lily's eyes were wide, her small hands trembling. "You promise you won't be mad?" Daniel nodded. "I promise." She swallowed hard. "The night the video came out, the one they said was you. Mom went out. She told me she was going to the store, but I couldn't sleep, so I looked out my window. I saw her at the cafe near the station. She was talking to someone." Daniel's heart began to pound. "Who?" Lily hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "Captain Reeves." The name struck like a blow. Reeves, the same man who had turned his back in the hearing room, who had signed the suspension papers without meeting his eyes. Daniel forced his voice steady. "Are you sure it was him?" She nodded quickly, tears starting to form. I saw him give her something small like a little silver stick. She looked scared. Then she saw me, I think, because she turned around fast and they both left. Daniel felt his throat tighten. The flash drive. It fit too perfectly the timing, the fear in Karen's voice, the data he'd found on her computer. Lily sniffled. Did Mommy do something bad? The question broke something inside him. He took her hand, squeezing gently. No, sweetheart. She's just caught in something she doesn't understand. Lily's lower lip quivered. I don't want them to take you away. He brushed her hair back. They won't, he said softly, though the lie burned in his chest. That night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed. The faint ticking of the wall clock echoed through the house. On the table lay the notes he'd written, the connections, the names, the places. Reeves had given Karen the flash drive, SafeTrack had edited the footage, and now the unmarked car outside was the silent enforcer ensuring he stayed quiet. Max sat nearby, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Daniel whispered, They're circling, boy. Closing in. The dog tilted his head, ears twitching at some distant sound outside. Daniel rose, crossed to the window, and peered through the curtain. A shadow moved near the curb, a silhouette leaning against a car door, smoking. The same black sedan. His pulse surged. He turned off the light and watched until the figure flicked the cigarette into the snow and drove away. When he returned to the table, something shifted inside him. Not panic this time, but purpose. They had taken his badge, his job, and his reputation. He wouldn't let them take his daughter. He gathered his notes, folded them neatly, and slipped them into his jacket beside the flash drive labeled Truth. Upstairs, Karen turned in her sleep, murmuring something indistinct. Daniel stood in the doorway of Lily's room for a long moment, watching her sleep. Max curled at her feet like a guardian carved from shadow. The road ahead had already chosen him. Snow had been falling since dusk, a steady curtain that muffled the neighborhood into silence. The lights from passing cars blurred into streaks across the window, and Daniel sat by the kitchen table staring at the notebook spread before him, every line of handwriting now meaningless under the weight of what he knew. Karen had gone to bed early, claiming a headache. Lily slept upstairs, her breathing soft, her small world still untouched by the fear gathering outside. Max lay near the door, his amber eyes half open, body tense in that way dogs sense what words cannot say. The house creaked. The furnace sighed, and somewhere beyond the walls a sound interrupted the quiet, the crunch of boots on snow. Daniel froze. Another step closer this time. He reached for the light switch but didn't flip it. Instead, he moved to the back window, barely parting the curtain. Two men stood near the fence, their forms blurred by the falling snow. One leaned against the post, speaking into a radio, while the other cupped his hands around a cigarette to shield it from the wind. The glow briefly illuminated his face, and Daniel's chest tightened. It was Officer Pratt, one of his former squad mates, the same man who had once pulled him from a wreck during a pursuit years ago. The voice that answered him, though faint, was unmistakable Sergeant Reeves. Orders came through. Reeves said, his tone calm, almost casual. SafeTrack wants the girl out by morning. Protective custody. The mother's on board. Pratt hesitated. And the father? Reeves exhaled smoke, the cloud drifting through the beam of a nearby streetlight. He doesn't get a vote. They'll call it a temporary placement until the evaluation's done. Once she's under supervision, the case closes clean. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. They were coming for Lily, not under arrest, not through legal means, but under the guise of protection. He strained to hear the rest. Pratt's voice lowered. What if he resists? Reeves paused, his silhouette rigid. Then we follow procedure. Just make sure the report reads clean. The words settled like ice in Daniel's chest. He let the curtain fall, stepping back into the dark kitchen. Max rose silently, tail stiff, sensing his master's heartbeat quicken. Daniel crouched beside him, whispering, "They're not taking her, not tonight." The dog's ears flicked once in understanding. He moved through the house with deliberate quiet. Each step was a memory. Lily's drawings taped to the wall, Karen's forgotten mug on the counter, the old coat he hadn't worn since his last patrol. He grabbed it now, shoving the notebook and flash drive into the inner pocket. In the drawer beside the sink lay his badge. For a moment his fingers hovered over it. The brass glinted faintly under the sliver of moonlight filtering through the blinds. It had once meant duty, honor, belonging. Now it was nothing but a reminder of how easily those words could be turned against him. He set it on the table, the sound small but final. Then he went upstairs. Lily stirred as he entered her room. "Daddy," she whispered, voice thick with sleep. He knelt beside her bed, pressing a finger to his lips. "Shh, sweetheart. We have to go. Right now." Confusion flickered in her eyes. "Go where somewhere safe," he said softly. "I'll explain later." She hesitated only a moment before nodding, trusting him completely. He helped her into her coat, wrapping her scarf tight, then slung her small backpack over his shoulder. Max waited at the door, alert, ready. From outside came the low hum of an idling engine. Daniel glanced toward the window. Headlights glowed faintly beyond the snow curtain. They were close. He led Lily down the stairs, avoiding the creaky step he'd known since she was a baby. In the kitchen, the clock ticked toward midnight. Karen's door remained shut upstairs. He wanted to believe she hadn't known what they planned, but deep down he wasn't sure anymore. He placed a folded note beside his badge on the table, just 3 words. "Protect her well." Then he turned to Lily. "Stay close to me no matter what." She nodded, clutching his hand. They slipped out through the back, the cold biting instantly at their faces. The snow reached their ankles, thick and unbroken, except for Max's tracks ahead. The dog moved first, guiding them toward the alley behind the house. The hum of the car engine grew louder, followed by the faint crackle of a police radio. Daniel crouched, pulling Lily down beside the trash bins. Through the slats of the fence, he saw shadows moving toward the porch, Pratt and another officer, their flashlights sweeping the steps. "We've got movement inside," Pratt said quietly. Reeves's voice came through his radio, sharp and commanding. "Hold position until confirmation." Daniel pressed a finger to his lips again, eyes locked on his daughter's trembling face. Max growled low, almost inaudibly, the sound vibrating against Daniel's leg. "Easy, boy," he whispered. They waited until the flashlight swung toward the front door, then slipped through the gate and into the alley. The street beyond was empty, silent but for the hiss of falling snow. Daniel lifted Lily into his arms, ignoring the protest of his still healing hip, and moved quickly. Max padded beside him, leaving a second set of prints in the snow that vanished almost as soon as they formed. Behind them, a door creaked open and voices shouted, but the wind swallowed the words. By the time they reached the end of the block, Daniel dared to glance back. The house was a dim outline against the white nightlights flickering as shadows moved inside. His badge lay on the kitchen table, catching the faintest glint from the streetlight through the window, one last trace of a man who had once believed justice had rules. He turned away, tightening his grip on Lily. "Daddy," she whispered against his shoulder. "Are they the bad people?" He exhaled slowly, watching the fog of his breath drift into the cold air. "They're just people who forgot what's right," he said. She was quiet after that, her head resting against his coat. They walked until the snow thinned and the city lights faded into distance. Ahead lay the frozen river, and beyond it the old train depot, dark and abandoned since the freight company moved west. Daniel knew there would be shelter there at least for the night. Max bounded ahead, pausing at every sound, every flicker of light, his loyalty guiding them through the storm. When they reached the edge of the river, Daniel looked back one last time. The glow of their neighborhood was faint now, swallowed by distance and snow. He set Lily down, taking her small hand in his. "This is just the beginning, sweetheart," he murmured. "But we're together, and that's what matters." Max nudged his leg as if in agreement, and as they crossed the frozen bridge under the whispering snow, Daniel Holt, once a police officer, now a fugitive father, knew there was no turning back. The morning came slowly wrapped in gray light and wind that scraped across the frozen fields. Daniel and Lily had slept for only a few hours inside the shell of the old train depot, huddled beneath a blanket that smelled faintly of dust and oil. Max lay close, his fur coated with frost, his breath forming small clouds that rose and vanished in the cold air. When Daniel opened his eyes, his muscles ached from the concrete floor, but the ache meant he was still alive. Outside, the storm had quieted, leaving the world pale and hollow. He stood brushing snow from his coat and listened only the distant groan of wind through metal beams. Lily stirred her cheeks, flushed with sleep. "Daddy, where are we going now?" she murmured. Daniel forced a reassuring smile. "West," he said softly. "Somewhere no one can find us." She nodded without question, the simple faith of a child anchoring him more than she could know. He walked to the doorway, scanning the road. The truck stop they had passed the night before was miles away, but the thought of finding another vehicle lingered. He needed distance and fast. The network would be awake by now, and with it, the reach of every badge he had once trusted. By noon, they found an old pickup parked behind an abandoned shed. The keys were gone, but the door lock was rusted and weak. Daniel hesitated for only a second before forcing it open. He hot-wired it the way he had been trained to spot, not perform. The engine coughed twice before catching a rough growl that seemed too loud against the silence of the snow. He helped Lily climb in, Max jumping into the bed of the truck tail, sweeping a small cloud of powder behind him. As the tires spun and gripped the icy ground, Daniel felt both relief and dread. Every mile they gained was another marker on someone's radar. 2 hours later, the confirmation came. At a gas station outside Pine Hollow, he parked near a pump and stepped inside to pay cash. The clerk, a thin man with a radio tuned low, glanced up as Daniel approached. "You from around here?" he asked. Daniel shook his head, laying down a few bills. The clerk nodded toward the small TV mounted in the corner. "Lot of police chatter today. They say someone stole a department vehicle near Spokane. Dangerous suspect, possibly armed." Daniel's stomach tightened. The screen showed a list of partial license plates scrolling beneath the headline. Among them, the numbers matched his. He kept his voice steady. "Guess people will steal anything these days." The clerk chuckled without suspicion, handing him the receipt. "Keep safe out there. Roads are nasty." Daniel managed a nod and walked out, his pulse hammering against his ribs. He drove until the sky dimmed again, snow returning in thin veils that danced under the headlights. Lily slept beside him, her head resting on his arm, the rhythm of the truck lulling her back into fragile dreams. Max occasionally barked once, low and cautious whenever the wind shifted. Daniel's thoughts ran in circles. Reeves, the false report. The silent watchers. He realized he was now not just a suspended officer, but officially a fugitive, the kind of man his younger self would have been sent to hunt. He looked at Lily's sleeping face and felt both guilt and resolve intertwine. She was worth every law he had just broken. As the road curved toward the mountains, the storm thickened. Snow piled faster, the wind cutting visibility to mere yards. He slowed the truck, leaning forward, eyes straining against the swirling white. Then came a sudden jolt, a thump from the back, followed by a sharp bark of pain. He slammed the brakes, the truck skidding before stopping sideways across the road. "Max," he shouted, throwing open the door. The cold slapped him instantly as he stumbled to the rear. Max was half standing, one paw held awkwardly off the ground, blood seeping faintly into the snow. The dog tried to hide it, wagging his tail once as if to say he was fine, but the crimson streak betrayed him. Daniel knelt beside him, hands trembling as he examined the paw. A shard of ice had sliced between the pads, not deep, but enough to hurt. "You stubborn old soldier," Daniel murmured, tearing a strip from his sleeve to bind it. "No, you're not quitting on me now." Max licked his wrist eyes bright despite the pain. When he looked up, the sight stopped him cold. Their tracks behind them stretched for miles, 2 sets of footprints, and a third Max's marked by faint dots of red. It was a trail no snow could hide fast enough. He felt the weight of it, the inevitability of pursuit. He finished wrapping the paw, tightening the cloth. "We'll keep going," he said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. "1 mile at a time." Max responded with a short huff, determined. Daniel lifted him gently into the truck bed again and climbed back into the driver's seat. Lily stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, is Max hurt?" Daniel smiled faintly, forcing calm into his voice. "Just a scratch, sweetheart. He's tougher than both of us." She reached out the window, touching Max's fur as the truck moved again. The dog rested his head on the edge of the bed, eyes half-closed, tail giving slow, steady beats against the side. Hours later, when they finally stopped by a frozen rest area surrounded by pine trees, the snow had erased most of the road behind them. Daniel stepped out, the air sharp with the smell of pine and diesel. Max limped toward him, the makeshift bandage already tinged with pink. Daniel knelt again, his breath misting between them. "It's not far now," he said softly, stroking the dog's neck. "We'll find a place to rest. You've earned it." Max pressed his muzzle against his shoulder, and for a moment Daniel forgot the chase, the radio bulletins, the betrayal. There was only the steady beat of 3 hearts enduring the cold. When they finally started walking again beneath the pale glow of the moon, Max's gait carried a faint hitch, a rhythm almost in sync with Daniel's limp. Together their shadows moved as one across the endless white, leaving behind a trail that told not of flight, but of survival. The storm carried them west, mile after mile, until the highway faded into 2 narrow lanes lined with pine and shadow. By evening, Daniel's hands ached from gripping the wheel, his breath fogging the windshield in the failing heater. Lily had fallen asleep again, curled against his side beneath a blanket that barely kept the cold away. Max lay stretched out behind the seats, his bandaged paw resting awkwardly, the steady rhythm of his breathing reassuring in the quiet. Ahead, a faint glow appeared through the falling snow, an old roadside inn half buried beneath drifts, its sign flickering in the wind. The name, Miller's Rest, hung from rusted chains. Daniel hesitated only a moment before pulling in. The truck's engine sputtered as it died, the silence that followed heavy and expectant. Inside the lobby was warm but sparse, a counter lined with faded brochures and the smell of wood smoke in the air. Behind the desk stood a woman in her late 50s, tall and sturdy, with hair the color of ash, and eyes that had once known command. "Evening," she said, her voice low but steady. "You folks look like you've been driving through a war." Daniel gave a weary half-smile. "Something like that." She studied him for a long second, eyes flicking to the limp in his gait, the child at his side, the dog that waited patiently by the door. "Rooms are cash only," she said finally. "No questions asked." Daniel nodded, grateful, and slid folded bills across the counter. She handed him an old brass key. "Up the stairs, last door on the left. Heat takes a while to kick in, but it's clean." An hour later, Lily slept again, her head on a pillow that smelled faintly of cedar. Max curled near the bed, his paw stretched out carefully while Daniel sat near the window watching the snow swirl under the yellow light of a street lamp. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe without listening for sirens. Downstairs, faint music drifted through the vents, an old radio crackling between stations. Then came a voice, distant but familiar, speaking over the static. Daniel froze. Suspect believed to be traveling with minor. Vehicle now abandoned outside Pine Hollow. The voice was male professional, clipped the kind that could only belong to law enforcement dispatch. But beneath it came another lower voice, softer, steadying the transmission. Daniel's breath caught. He knew that tone, that rhythm. It was his own echoing from recordings used in training exercises years ago. The woman downstairs must have recognized it too. He heard the faint scrape of a chair, then silence. Moments later, there was a soft knock at the door. Daniel tensed, reaching instinctively toward his coat pocket where his badge no longer rested. He opened the door a fraction, ready for anything. Grace Miller stood there holding 2 steaming mugs. "Hot cocoa," she said simply. "You look like you could use something warm." Daniel hesitated, then stepped aside. She set the mugs on the nightstand and turned toward him with a look that carried neither fear nor judgment. "You're Daniel Holt," she said quietly. "Used to be with Spokane PD. I remember your voice from the dispatch lines. I was with communications back in the day. The way you called in your units never forgot that steadiness." Daniel's expression hardened. "If you recognized me, you know what they're saying now." Grace nodded. "I also know the system and how easy it is to twist a man's record when someone powerful needs a scapegoat." Her voice softened. "You and your little girl can stay here as long as you need. No one comes by much anymore." Daniel studied her face for deceit, but found none. Just quiet resolve, the kind that came from losing more than she cared to speak of. The next morning, Grace brought a tray of breakfast and lingered. "You said you were framed," she began. "You have proof." Daniel glanced at the window, then back at her. "A flash drive. It has data from the department server's footage they edited to make it look like I shot an unarmed suspect." Grace's eyes narrowed. "SafeTrack Systems," she muttered. "They've been sniffing around for years. My husband worked for the department's tech division before he passed. Said something about contracts that didn't add up." She looked toward the ceiling, thoughtful. "Wait here." She disappeared upstairs and returned 20 minutes later, her hands dusted with cobwebs and an old file folder tucked under her arm. "I kept some of his notes," she said, spreading them on the table. The papers were yellowed, covered in meticulous handwriting. Among them, Daniel spotted a printed letterhead, SafeTrack Integrated Security Solutions, and beneath it, signatures. One of them belonged to Chief Harris. His pulse quickened as Grace continued. "This was buried when he died. He was investigating discrepancies in funding contracts signed by the chief himself, diverting department money to private surveillance programs. They called it a modernization initiative. In truth, it gave SafeTrack control over body cam servers." She tapped the page. They could edit, delete, fabricate, all under the guise of maintenance. Daniel exhaled slowly, the pieces aligning at last. So the footage wasn't just altered, it was commissioned. Grace nodded grimly. "Someone wanted you gone because you were in the way." The truth hit harder than any accusation. He leaned back, rubbing his face, the fatigue of weeks crashing over him. "We can prove this," he said finally, though his voice was a whisper. Grace shook her head. "Not yet. If we expose it now, they'll bury us both. But there's a contact, someone my husband trusted in Oregon. He runs an independent veteran network, still has channels to federal oversight. If you can get there, you'll have a chance." Outside, the snow had stopped, but the sky remained the color of smoke. Daniel stood by the window, watching Max limp across the porch, his tracks merging with Lily's smaller ones. For the first time since the nightmare began, he felt something faintly like direction. Grace's voice softened. "You're not alone in this, Officer Holt. Some of us still remember what truth sounds like." He turned toward her eyes, tired but alive again. "Then maybe there's hope yet." The wind had softened by morning, carrying the scent of thawing pine and old smoke through the cracks of the small roadside inn. Daniel sat by the window, a cup of black coffee cooling between his palms, eyes tracing the faint tracks Max had left outside. The world beyond still looked fragile, as though winter had exhausted its fury and left only silence behind. Grace Miller stood near the stove, flipping through the stack of papers she had unearthed the night before the evidence that could undo everything the department had built on lies. Lily sat quietly at the corner table, her small face lit by the glow of Grace's old laptop, a relic from another decade, its keys worn smooth by time. She had insisted on helping. Daniel had said no at first, but she had inherited his stubbornness and her mother's quiet precision. "You said we need to make them see the truth," she had whispered. "So let's show them." Her words had stuck to him all night, echoing louder than the storm. Now she was typing small fingers, moving cautiously over the keyboard as if each word carried weight. Grace leaned over her shoulder, murmuring directions. "That forum's old, mostly retired officers," she said softly. "They still talk, still carry influence. Once something lands there, it spreads." Daniel exhaled slowly. "And what happens if they trace it back to us?" Grace gave a faint smile. "Then they'll have to admit they read it." Lily looked up from the screen, her green eyes steady. "It's okay, Daddy. I won't use your name." The video they were about to share was unedited footage, grainy raw, but clear enough to expose the lie that had destroyed Daniel's career. It showed the night in question, a domestic call gone wrong, the suspect pulling a weapon, the flash, the chaos, and then Daniel shouting for an ambulance, not standing over an unarmed man as the altered version had shown. Grace had recovered it from a corrupted folder on the backup drive Daniel had nearly thrown away. When they first played it, he couldn't speak for a full minute. The truth was right there, simple and absolute. Lily uploaded the file through a hidden account under the name Northlight. She added a short message, typed slowly, one word at a time. "For those who still believe in the badge, watch before you judge." Then she pressed send. The progress bar crept across the screen, and when it reached the end, the weight in the room shifted. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, voice low. "You did something brave, sweetheart." She smiled faintly. "I just told the truth." Hours passed. Outside, the clouds broke open to reveal a weak slice of blue sky. Daniel paced the narrow hallway, unable to sit still. Grace monitored the old radio, scanning through static for any mention of the upload. It came just after noon, a faint voice breaking through the noise. "Source unknown. Retired Officers Forum lit up this morning. Footage contradicts official report. Internal review expected." Grace looked up, eyes wide. It's spreading. By evening, the storm had moved online. The video traveled from one forum to another, shared through veteran networks, social feeds, even private law enforcement groups. The footage was undeniable, time-stamped, authenticated by dozens of former officers who recognized Daniel's voice, his procedures, the call signs. Then came the statements, retired captains, union representatives, even the city's deputy attorney calling for a full investigation. Daniel read the headlines in disbelief. SPPD cover-up allegations surface. Body cam footage. Disputes. Officer suspension. Public outcry demands review of SafeTrack contract. Grace brought him the evening paper, her hands trembling slightly from excitement rather than age. "They can't bury it now," she said. "Not when the public's watching." Daniel sat down slowly, staring at the front page. His picture wasn't there yet, but the truth was. And for the first time in months, he felt like a man reclaiming his name. But the ripple of exposure did not stop at headlines. Late that night, Grace's phone buzzed with a message from a contact she still had in communications. She read it silently, then handed the phone to Daniel. "Reeves suspended pending inquiry. Chief Harris resigns. SafeTrack contract frozen. Stay hidden until cleared." Daniel read the words twice, the reality of them sinking in like the warmth of a long-awaited sunrise. "It's happening," he whispered. "They're turning on each other." Grace nodded. Once the truth starts breathing, lies suffocate fast. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, her head resting against Max's shoulder. The dog's bandaged paw twitched as he dreamed a soft whine escaping now and then, but his body pressed close to hers in silent protection. Daniel stood there for a long time, watching them, the weight of months finally easing from his shoulders. The girl who had seen her father fall from grace had become the one to lift him back up. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, whispering, "You're braver than anyone I've ever known." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and forgiving, as if the world itself wanted to start over. In the distance, sirens wailed not for him this time, but for the men who had thought themselves untouchable. News spread that Reeves had been questioned under oath, and when pressed, he admitted to procedural inconsistencies. Within 48 hours, the chief's resignation became a televised confession, his face pale beneath studio lights. The company SafeTrack issued statements of cooperation, but Daniel knew what that meant. Panic dressed as integrity. Grace turned off the radio and looked at him. "You could go back," she said quietly. "They'll clear your record, maybe even give you your badge." Daniel shook his head slowly, eyes drifting toward the window where the snow danced under the lamplight. "I don't want the badge," he said. "I just want peace." Grace smiled faintly. "Then you've already earned it." That night, as the world beyond the inn churned with noise and headlines inside, there was only warmth, the steady crackle of the fire, and the breathing of those who had endured. The storm that had once chased Daniel Holt had finally turned on its makers. And in the glow of the dying fire, he understood something simple but absolute. Sometimes truth doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, carried by the smallest, bravest voice. The sun rose pale over the training fields of the Spokane Police Academy, the light thin and gold against the frost that glittered across the grass. Winter had returned, but this time it felt gentler, as though the world itself was finally exhaling after holding its breath too long. Daniel Holt stood by the fence line, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, the crisp air filling his lungs with something like peace. Behind him, the low hum of chatter carried from the field house young recruits in gray uniforms, gathering for their morning drills. Max stood at his side, still proud, despite the faint limp that marked his every step, his fur thick and graying along the muzzle. Beside them, Lily tugged her knitted hat lower over her ears, her breath puffing white in the cold. She looked up at her father, her voice soft. "You nervous?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe a little. First day of anything always feels that way." She grinned. "Even for someone who's done everything already?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Especially then." It had been 2 months since the truth had come to light. The investigations had run their course, and the city's board had offered Daniel full reinstatement, back pay honors, restored a public apology. They had even asked him to stand at the press conference to smile for the cameras to show that justice had been done. But he had declined. "I don't need the badge to serve," he had said simply. "I just want to build something better." Grace Miller had arranged the introduction to the academy director, an old friend of her late husband's. The academy had long needed someone to lead its canine training program after the last instructor retired. It was work that suited Daniel, quiet, disciplined, full of purpose, without ceremony. And so he came back, not as the man who'd been wronged, but as one who still believed in what the uniform could stand for when worn with honesty. Max adjusted beside him, tail flicking, once eyes scanning the recruits forming lines across the snow-covered field. Daniel gave a soft command. "Heel." The dog obeyed instantly, the years of partnership between them seamless, unspoken. He had taught dozens of handlers in his career, but now he would teach the teachers the next generation. He looked toward the group where the young instructor on duty raised a hand for silence. The recruits turned toward Daniel, uncertain at first, whispers passing quietly among them. They all knew who he was. Every headline, every broadcast had carried his name. but when he spoke, the murmurs died away. Most of you joined because you wanted to help people. He began, his voice even but strong. That's good. Hold on to that. But remember, a badge is only as good as the heart behind it. This program isn't about control, it's about trust. Between you and your partner, between you and the people you serve. As he spoke, Max sat proudly at his side, ears perked, eyes focused. The recruits watched as Daniel gestured toward the dog. This is Max. He's been my partner longer than some of you have been out of high school. We've seen things that test a man's faith. But what kept us alive wasn't skill. It was loyalty. His gaze swept across the young faces before him, some eager, some uncertain. You'll learn commands, tactics, discipline. But never forget that loyalty works both ways. You can't ask for trust if you don't give it. The morning stretched on the lessons, mixing obedience drills with quiet moments of reflection. Max moved between recruits, sniffing their gloves, accepting their tentative pats. Each time Daniel gave a command, the dog obeyed with the grace of muscle memory, though every step carried a faint hitch from the injury that winter night. Lily sat on the fence, watching proudly, sketching in a small notebook Grace had given her. The world had righted itself in its own imperfect way, not through courts or press releases, but through the steady rhythm of healing. By late afternoon, the Academy hosted its annual Winter Honor Ceremony, a tradition marking the end of training for the year. Families gathered in the courtyard, scarves fluttering, breath mingling in the cold air. Snow began to fall again, soft flakes landing silently on the rows of uniforms. Daniel stood near the flagpole, Max at his side, while Lily fidgeted beside him with a mixture of pride and anticipation. The director stepped forward, announcing new appointments, commendations, and the induction of the Academy's new K-9 division under the leadership of Instructor Holt. Applause rippled through the crowd, brief but sincere. Daniel inclined his head in thanks, then crouched beside Max, tightening the dog's collar one last time. "We made it, partner," he whispered. "Different kind of battlefield, but the same mission." Lily stepped forward when the director invited her to release Max as part of the symbolic first drill. She took the leash gently from her father's hand, her breath trembling but eyes shining. "Ready, Max," she whispered. The dog wagged his tail, sensing her excitement. She unclipped the leash, letting it fall into the snow. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then Max began to walk slow at first, the limp noticeable but sure, his paws pressing deep into the white ground. The recruits watched as he crossed the field, each step deliberate, his gaze steady ahead. At the far end, one young trainee knelt, extending a gloved hand. Max stopped before him, sniffed once, and then sat, a silent gesture of trust accepted. The moment lingered, framed by falling snow and the hush of awe. Daniel felt something in his chest ease completely, the final knot untangling. This was how it was meant to end, not with noise, but with quiet continuity. The loyalty that had carried him through war, betrayal, and exile now lived on, passed from one heart to another. Lily turned, smiling through tears, and ran into his arms. He lifted her easily, spinning once, laughter breaking free in the cold air. "You see, sweetheart," he murmured. "Even when things break, they can be rebuilt." She nodded against his shoulder. "Because we never gave up." The ceremony ended with music from the Academy band, a slow, proud tune that carried across the field. Grace watched from the sidelines, her coat buttoned tight, her smile small but full. The sky deepened into twilight, the snow still falling. The world caught in that perfect balance between ending and beginning. Daniel stood with Lily and Max beneath the flag, the dog leaning gently against his leg. The headlights of distant cars glowed along the road like lanterns leading home. He looked down at Max, at the faint limp that marked their shared history, and felt only gratitude. "Come on, boy," he said softly. "Time to rest." And together they walked toward the warmth of the Academy lights, leaving behind a trail of prints. Three distinct paths intertwined, fading slowly into the snow. Before you go, tell me what part of Daniel's story moved you the most. Was it the moment he ran through the snow with his daughter, or when Max limped beside him, refusing to give up? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. And where are you watching from tonight? Share your city or state below. It's always good to know where this story found its way. If you believe in loyalty and second chances and in never giving up on the truth, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for the next story. Your support helps keep these stories alive.